Hey everyone, welcome to the 291st episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. This episode is brought to you by patron Caleb King, who is getting a hat at the $10 level. Thanks, Caleb. I'm Oren Kaplan.
And I'm Matt SmithPhil. Today we've got the filmmakers behind the film The Spine of Night for our Halloween spooky episode. The Spine of Night is an ultraviolet epic fantasy set in the land of magic.
Wait, did you say ultraviolet or ultraviolent?
Oh, well, maybe I meant both, but ultraviolent. Yeah, it's quite graphic, quite naked, super fun, rotoscoped animated film. We've got the filmmakers Philip Gelatt and Morgan Galen King on to talk about the process of painstakingly rotoscoping a feature film. Not entirely themselves, but boy, nearly literally and certainly spiritually. They had a small team of collaborators, but I think it's a really awesome conversation about how you can make an awesome, kick-ass, no-holds-barred movie the way you want to.
That is insane. Do not watch it with your kids.
Do not watch it with your kids.
And it premiered at South by, right?
Yeah.
They played South by this year. I think it was the premiere. And Morgan worked on it for 7 years, maybe longer. I think Phil is pretty much there the whole time also.
But it is a classic example of just shooting it, bootstrapping it. They worked on it together for a significant amount of time before producers came on or any outside money came on. And then eventually they had actors like Richard E. Grant, Lucy Lawless, Patton Oswalt, Betty Gabriel, Joe Manganiello, all sorts of awesome people who, as we talk about, are kind of in the nerdy world. So people who would respond to the films of like Ralph Bakshi or kind of like those animated, crazy rotoscoped films from the 70s and 80s, basically. Most notably, The Lord of the Rings. If you were ever a kid who was like, oh, I want to watch Lord of the Rings, and your parents brought home the wrong video, that might be your way in. But or Cool World, Ralph Bakshi.
Brad Pitt movie?
Brad Pitt, yeah. And, the adult kind of anti-Disney sort of animator. Anyway, the point is, it's cool, it's psychedelic, it's really wild, and like I said, bootstrapped. So it's a movie that they made exactly how they wanted to make it, and that's pretty inspiring and cool.
Yeah, it's a great example of making a feature before you have the resources to make it just by making it on your own and letting it grow, which with animation you kind of have more freedom to do things like that. But anyhow, very cool, very fun conversation. Before we talk to them, Matt, we're just gonna mention real quick that this awful thing happened yesterday. A cinematographer that we have a lot of friends in common with on Facebook died on set in an accident. It's crazy. We just want to, we're sure a lot of our listeners knew her, and we just wanted to say that we're thinking of everyone, and yeah, just kind of a reminder of how crazy what we do is. And I don't know, I don't really have anything to add to the conversation aside from just the awareness of this and thinking about the people that were involved.
Yeah. I think we can leave most of the conversation to people smarter or at least louder than us on social media, etc. But it's so sad, and always these sorts of accidents hit me especially hard because indie filmmakers are a special group of people and a community I feel really close to. So it was a bummer. It's really terrible. So stay safe, everyone. Safety protocols are important, and there's a lot of accidents on set that are avoidable, and it's all up to us to actively work to avoid them.
Yeah,
prevent that stuff from happening. It's terrible.
Maybe can we dedicate an episode to I don't know. Is that weird?
Sure, certainly. I mean, this feels like a strange one.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we're thinking of Helena Hutchins as a cinematographer, and Joel Souza as the director, and yeah, thinking of them.
Yeah, and everyone else, stay safe.
Yes. Anyhow, we should hop into this interview. Before we do that, we want to remind people we have a Patreon page, patreon.com/justshootitpod. It's where you can support the podcast. Trying to bring you current news and our thoughts on filmmaking and cool guests. And I think knowing that people listen, especially knowing that we have patrons that listen, is super helpful. We've gotten a lot of really kind emails recently. We had Oh man, I didn't do the secret word. I'm a master of starting trends that end after 2 times, but we did have. I'm just gonna maybe do one shout out to George VK, who, as soon as our episode came out, fast forwarded to the end, heard the secret word at the end, which was audio cocktail, and emailed us. So thanks, George VK. Thanks for saying the secret word. Spoiler alert, there is no secret word on this episode, but maybe there will be one on the next episode. That's why you have to listen to the end of each episode.
That's right. That's the secret. So without much more ado, we'll hop into our conversation with the filmmakers behind The Spine of Night, which releases October 29th. And if you go to spineofnight.com, you can learn how to watch it, which you should. And now here's our conversation with Morgan and Phil.
Hey guys, we're here with Phil and Morgan. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. The filmmakers behind Spine of Night, which I think will be available by the time this episode is dropping.
Where is it playing? Is it playing in theaters?
I happen to know that it's playing at the Lemley in Glendale because I saw the poster and was excited to talk to you guys about it.
Oh, that's awesome. You saw the poster in the wild. I've never seen
In the wild.
a free range poster. There's a bunch of them on my bed back there. But yeah.
Oh, that's cool. What's your guys' policy on like when you see a poster of something you worked on in the wild? Like, do you stop, take a picture with it, and tell people that walked by that you worked on it?
I would, but it has never happened.
I do not. Because I would feel too awkward about it. I'm just like, oh, okay, I see what's going on there, and then I just carry on.
I say take a selfie with it, everyone.
Yeah, I think Morgan, you should go to the Lemley right now. We'll wait. Cool. So can you tell us guys a little bit about your history? Maybe we'll start with you, Morgan, and like kind of your background and how you worked up to Spine of Night.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll try to keep it from being the entire life biography. I did a lot of art in high school. I thought I was going to college for art, but I did not get along with the department there at all. They were very traditional, and I was really into like comic books and fantasy art and pop art. So I dropped out of that, went over to mass communications, which was, turns out that's journalism, not filmmaking, but I was at a liberal arts school. So I would just sneak in at night and use the equipment and make, weird horror shorts for myself and live action stuff. Although, I mean, I grew up, as a kid, so immersed in all the rotoscope animation of the late 70s and early 80s. But
what's like the most famous rotoscope animation from that time that like people would know?
I mean, Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings is probably the one most people know. The last segment of Heavy Metal, from the early 80s, the Tarna segment is rotoscoped. And then, a lot of the Ralph Bakshi stuff. Pretty much everyone, at least of a certain age, has seen that Aha Take On Me video. That's a very famous rotoscope work. So those are all sort of like right at the era where I was a kid and watching that stuff.
Is that, when they did that, was it like video? Mm-hmm. And then they drew
no, I mean, the Bakshi ones would have been shot on film and then rotoscope. Yeah. The Aha one, may have been video, but I'm assuming it was also film.
That's a good question. That's a good question. Because like there's it's sort of an unearthed early Tom Waits music video that I was reading about, was this huge leap in being in the first time you could use video for rotoscoping. And they were developing it to use on Ralph Bakshi's American Pop, but he couldn't get it done in time. So I think the only thing that was ever really done with it was the Tom Waits video.
And that's just all done by hand, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And ours is all done by hand too on a computer, but we didn't there's a lot of new tech that people are using that are like AI based stuff that is like sort of rotoscoping looking. That's, I'm sure it's, 5 to 10 years. It's going to be incredible, but it's not even still. I have yet to see anything that can really match drawing it frame by hand, which is kind of unfortunate because it takes forever.
And when you say frame by frame, is that like 12 frames a second?
Yeah, 12. But even then, like if you look at like the old Ralph Bakshi stuff, he still, because his background's in cartooning, he still uses a lot of like holds on the background characters where they're only animated when they're doing something, which I always thought looked really weird with humanoid, like realistically human characters.
And then when your wrist started clicking at 32, you were like, maybe holds aren't so bad.
Right. I mean, I've made some questionable decisions and the brute force approach we took. I had to sleep with a wrist brace for a while, but eventually my hand just got stronger. And
Yeah.
It's very Conan.
right. This whole project was the wheel of pain.
Yeah.
Oh, where was I? So anyway, after I finished college, it wasn't a real film degree, and I didn't know anyone making films. So I spent the next long stretch doing graphic design.
In what part of the country?
Oh, I was in Southwest Virginia.
Okay. Big film place.
Yeah,
I think maybe we fast forward a little bit to that first rotoscoping project.
Yes.
Right.
To not get nothing really happened in that window. I couldn't make films, and then I hated what I was doing with graphic design, and I was like, I want to go back and make films. And I thought, what is the thing that I would make? What is the thing I don't see in the world? And it was all these great rotoscope fantasy films for adults. They're charmingly juvenile, but I thought, well, that's the thing that somehow stopped being made in the world, and it's a thing I want to know how to make, and I think I have the skills to reverse engineer how Ralph Bakshi was doing it. And so I did a series of short films just in my living room, then one where I actually had some local actors, and that one, which is Exordium, was like in the same setting as The Spine of Night, and that made its way over to Phil.
And you wrote these films also, right?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, because I'm looking on IMDb and it's like you made a short film and then you made this full-on feature film with a pretty awesome cast. Patton Oswalt, Joe Manganiello, Joe M, Lucy Lawless.
Yeah. And I want to get into the casting and dubbing and all of that. But first off, I want to understand. You said the short was shot in your living room, and you mean that literally, even though I assume there's all sorts of fantastical locations that are happening. So basically, you're doing image capture or performance capture, I should say.
I mean, not even really capture as much as just reference. Like there was no automation. I mean, it was the only room I had, so I said, tried to make room. I was living in this really narrow Philly row house at the time. And there's just nowhere to shoot. But I was like, my brother came over.
That would have been a great time for 9x16 framing.
Right. Yes. But once I could extract I take the footage, and you can get rid of my tiny apartment and make it
put it anywhere you want it to be. Yeah.
And it was very freeing. It was much easier to make it on The Spine of Night, where we actually had a full warehouse to run around in and actually, get up to a sprint.
But for your short, like, are you acting out the parts yourself?
I'm in all of those early ones. I do about half of them, but often, I was doing the camera work as well. So I was directing my brother in a gorilla costume, or my neighbor Mac as our first mongrel character, the role that Joe Manganiello would take over. And he says he's got a part where he wrestles a lion, and we just had him wrestle a comforter. And so
yeah, how much of the actor's like face and wardrobe and stuff do you end up?
I always start thinking it's going to be really helpful to use the costume. Like, we made a lot of very detailed costumes, and I think if the live action production values were high enough, maybe you could get there. But once you actually get into the rotoscoping process, it's like rarely is it as useful as you think the clothing's going to be. Like, making it look good in animation often means abandoning a lot of the live action details because someone's shirt gets caught on their belt, or you just have to. And so it ends up being much more traditional animation in the moment. It's so much of the rotoscoping comes down to like lip sync. It's really, really good for lip sync. Really capturing the human mouth, and like, it's amazing how many like actorly details I would never think of that actors, professional and otherwise, come up with. They just do weird things that if you left to my own devices, never would have thought to add, like these little finger twitches and sneers in the way that they do it.
I'm curious about, just to dig into that process specifically. When you're rotoing a character for an animated film, are you doing kind of basic shapes first and then going in and doing the detail, or is each frame like you're doing the whole thing? Like,
I mean, I do the whole thing every time, but it's using like traditional animation, like using an onion skin. So I'll take the previous layer, make it a transparency, and manipulate it as I'm working. So like if someone's bending their arm at the elbow, I'll select the forearm in Photoshop on the transparency layer and like rotate it on to match the movement speed of their body. So, but then you're still using the previous frame to draw the line work again, not drawing it from scratch with the video. And like if you look at like on YouTube, you'll see there's a variety of modern rotoscope music videos. There's a Taylor Swift one, but you can tell that they're not referring to a previous line work. They're drawing it completely fresh for every frame. And to get the Ralph Bakshi look, because of his cartooning background, we had to do it with the previous frames like you would in traditional animation.
Did you experiment with other looks, or was it just like, no, you guys are like, we want it to be Ralph Bakshi?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't. I had already had the process, like sort of the workflow, which is very Frankenstein together, from the short films, but I don't think we ever for a second really thought we wanted it to look different from that. It was just like we both envisioned this in that style as to the best of our abilities to recreate.
Well, because it's kind of an expansion of the style from your previous short too, right? Which is what got Phil's attention in the first place.
Yeah, for sure.
And Phil, do you have a background in animation also?
No, I don't. I mean, at this point, I've written a good deal of it.
I mean, you're a writer on Love, Death, and Robots.
Yeah, right? I am almost the only writer on Love, Death, and Robots.
Are you serious? Have you seen that show? It's really amazing.
Yeah, he wrote the love and death, but not the robots part.
Yeah, I wrote a couple of the robots. A couple of the robots aren't me, but I wrote a lot of death, not a lot of love in that show. But it's a good title. But that all came later. When I met Morgan, I had done. I'd been a screenwriter for a little while. I'd written Europa Report and this movie, The Bleeding House, and had done a couple of scripts that had never gotten made. And when I saw Exordium, I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I want to make. Let me meet this guy and we'll figure out how to make the like weirdo fantasy animated epic of our dreams.
Can I ask how it got on your radar?
Yeah, so it's so funny. Like I guess I was always fated to work in animation, so I was just friends with a lot of animators and artists and like comic book artists. I sort of started in comic books and just had always known animators. And so a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine who was an artist on Venture Brothers and other animated things, saw Exordium and was like, oh, I bet my friend Phil would like this because he likes super violent fantasy stuff. So he sent it to me and was like, hey, you'd probably dig this. And I was like, oh, I don't just dig this. I want to be this. Yeah.
I want to go to there.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how I found it. And at the time, it was in like Machinima. It was like a Machinima. That's how he saw it. Machinima put it up. When remember Machinima was a thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
The good old days, guys.
Yeah, right.
That's cool. And so what about, just to hop into the business side of things for a minute, how do you go about starting to finance this thing? And then how does casting play into
Morgan's eyes just got big.
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is, we started financing it just by putting our own money into it. And for a long time, that was it, because it was such a small animation team. So so at the beginning, it was just literally just Morgan and me. I was like, do you want to do this? He was like, sure. So then I rented like a cheap warehouse by where I live. I live in Rhode Island. There's like a bunch of old empty warehouses and you can just rent spaces.
So when you say a warehouse, you don't mean like an old soundstage. You mean an actual warehouse.
No, I literally mean a warehouse. Like
there's like Amazon workers all over the place.
Yeah, like an old mill that has been converted into like the space next to us they made vape oil, and then this other, it was not a film production space at all. And we then cast a bunch of like local actors, and I had lived in New York for a while, so I knew friends who were actors from New York, so we brought them up and did all the live action that way.
Wait, and the script already exists. You guys had already written the script.
Yeah.
So, and then Morgan wrote a draft, and then you guys kind of developed it together. Is that what happened?
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Cool.
And that was pretty quick.
You were like, less nudity, less blood, less destruction.
No.
You guys cut it by 90%, and that's how you got.
Yeah, this is the 10% we left in. Yeah.
Yeah. For those that haven't seen it, this movie is incredibly violent in a very cool way.
Yeah,
also
yeah.
incredibly naked. Don't
And
forget.
very naked. Yeah. Full naked all the time. Yeah.
I mean, not unlike rotoscoping. I mean, one of the appeals to me in doing the project and in starting the project in this way, to your question about the business, was that I figured if we started it in as uncompromising a way as possible, if eventually we had to compromise a little bit to get more money, we had at least started it in exactly the right way. Like it was, and that applies both to rotoscoping and to the nudity and the violence. Like those are both relatively uncompromising ways to make a thing. So yeah, so we started just us, and then eventually we needed to hire animators and et cetera. And eventually, as time dragged on, we just we needed more money. So
I want to pump the brakes there, though,
Yeah, of
because
course.
what was the reason why you needed more animators? Why did you need more animators? Because you just the two of you couldn't handle it. You were busy.
Well,
how did it expand out from there?
Yeah, I mean, I can't draw for at all. So I can't. So it was always, we always needed more than just Morgan. So the whole first year was us trying to find people who could do this style of animation, just because you need more animators, because otherwise it would have taken I don't want to say 100 years, but even longer than it already took us.
Wait, but did you guys film? You filmed the whole thing in live action already. You edited sound, music, everything. You knew the timing. A lot of kind of the shot selection and stuff like that had kind of been determined already.
Right, but to Morgan's point, though, sometimes it's a guy wrestling a blanket instead of a lion.
Yes.
Right. But you still probably needed to pay people and feed people or something. You needed a camera.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So we paid, not a ton of money. We paid, like, I can't remember what it was. It was maybe like $100 a day or something to people who came to the warehouse to be in the movie. And a lot of people were just friends who came to be those, aforementioned crowd people who weren't going to be animation holds in the background. Those were just like friends and family and people who thought it would be fun to come hang out in a warehouse with some dorks for a day.
But you kind of made the movie before it was even like financed or ready.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there exists a live action cut of the movie that Morgan and I both thought was like totally comprehensible to anybody. Like I remember showing it to my wife and a friend of hers and being like, "Right? Did you get it?" And they were both like, "Yeah." And then one of the people who haven't seen the movie, one of them was like, "So what was that piece of cardboard on the ground there?" And I was like, which was what the bloom looked like when we were filming. It's just like this white piece of cardboard. She was like, I was like, "Oh, you didn't get it at all," like, because you can't. It's incomprehensible if you don't, haven't been living inside the script for months. And that, to be very precise, like, so that looks. It's live action. It's like layers of live action layered over each other to like make those crowds. And then it's also just cards, like black cards with writing on them that say, super wide shot of army here, or, so all that stuff has a little bit of timing, but all of that timing would get massaged over the course of the animation process as those got filled in, and we could better assess how long those shots were going to be.
So the layers are shot on green screen?
No. Come on, green screen.
Well,
ridiculous.
How are you putting layers of live action footage on top of each other?
Literally just layering them with the background.
Like garbage mats or transparencies?
Just turning the opacity down.
Yeah.
So
when I say incomprehensible, I mean to a person who doesn't know what they're looking at, utterly incomprehensible. Yeah.
We just sent some of the behind the scenes footage over to QC for the special features for the future Blu-ray. And we just got back an ocean of notes from them. They're like, "You've misframed everything, and all these shots are messed up." And we're like, "That's how we worked. We just
that's what it was.
You wanted behind the scenes. This is how it's
crazy. I guess it's just occurred to me that you could literally pitch an animated movie by making this movie. If you're starting out, making the live action version of the movie for very little money, and then saying, "Here's the movie." Finance.
And for the animation process too, it takes about a day to animate 1 second of footage. So like having to trim a shot even a little bit is days of lost labor that you've just set on fire. So like you want to start at least with this kind of process, you have to start with a extremely tight cut that you're happy with. And then for the scenes where we still weren't sure how they felt, we just didn't animate them until we were ready.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm curious. So you've got basically the feature-length version of the movie, right? And you're like, okay, well, we've been spending a bunch of money running around in a warehouse. My wife thinks I'm insane. How do you go from that to raising real money and then getting a really stellar cast part of it as well? Like, did you create some sort of sizzle, or walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so we were sans any other producers for a chunk of the production. I mean, probably about 3 years, I would say. At which point, I went to people that I'd worked with before, producers that I worked with before, and said, here's what we have, and here's how the animation is going to look. Because at that point, we had not just the live action version of the movie, we also had portions that were animated and colored, right? So we, instead of saying, here's a crazy script, here's our crazy live action, it's like, here's our script, here's our live action, and here's how it's going to look, right?
Here's a little taste.
You can really understand it,
Were those animated pieces 100%? Like, did they make it into the film?
Yep.
Or Gotcha. Great.
Yeah,
but you weren't fully cast yet at that point.
No, at that point we had none of the big name voice cast, with the exception of Betty Gabriel, who was in Get Out, because we shot with her before she was in Get Out. She graduated from Juilliard, and we cast her, and she came on a train from New York to Providence and shot in a warehouse with us, and then went on to be in Get Out and all those Blumhouse movies.
Well done.
Yeah, she's fantastic. So once we had that in place, I went to producers that I'd worked with in the past and said, here's where we are with this. This is the amount of money that I think is going to take to keep us going. Can we, what can we do? And so part of that process was, we can get more money, but that is going to mean we're going to need to try to get the voice cast, right? So those two things sort of go hand in hand. To get more money, you need the voice cast, and then, if that makes sense. Yeah.
But people get it at that point, right?
People get it at that point. Yes. Yeah. Even if you're not a fan, I'm saying this because one of our producers isn't really a nerd. Even if you're not a fan of the nerd genres, you can see it and understand what it's going to be, and that it's going to be a relatively unique and uncompromising thing. So
that person can be like, "Oh yeah, that's some nerd shit. They'd love that stuff."
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, there'll be fans for this, I'm sure. I hate it, but I'm sure there'll be fans. Yeah.
And so when you say animate, I mean, obviously, Morgan, you're saying that it's like a second a day for an animator. Is it crazy? Can you outsource that stuff to India, Korea? How do you do, what kind of budgets do you have to raise to make a feature length animated film?
I mean, Phil could speak to the budget, but to the actual labor, we had a couple of people offer and do little test runs of doing it at a lower cost way, and it just did not look good. The quality that I was that I wanted to reach was just so much higher than they were going to spend the time on. So we ended up, I think it's partially why we ended up with such a small crew. I mean, we had at any time me and two other animators. Whereas Ralph,
you didn't go to Fiverr.com.
Right. Would have had 75 or 100 animators on a project like this. But, I guess Phil could speak to how much it costs.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you say Fiverr.com. I think I tried that at one point just because we were so desperate to find anybody to work on it. So if you look at the credits, right, you can see we've listed our main animators as lead animators, and there's a long list of people that we burned through that were just we hired them and they did a shot, and then it was either they couldn't handle the style or they were like, I can't do this, it's too time consuming. Theoretically, you could outsource this to, which is what a lot of bigger animated things do. They hire companies in Korea or in Japan or in India to do the bulk of the animation after the keyframes are done and stuff. But for this style of animation, I mean, it's so nobody does it. So the idea of finding a studio that could replicate the style, it never seemed feasible to do it. So
I think that the workflow for that is really tricky because it's having had I have a handful of friends in animation whose basically their job is to manage that foreign team of animators, right? So there's just a genuine, a huge amount of work just to make sure that team, as talented as they are, sees what you're going for. And so you basically need a lot of middle management that it sounds like wouldn't have made sense. And it kind of only makes sense on a series, basically.
You have to keep going to the bank and change your dollars to won, and then people are involved in Squid Games.
Just get Zelle, please.
My my point about knowing a lot of animators, I also know a lot of middle management animation people, and
they're not drawing or anything; they're just sending emails. Yeah.
And so, I mean, he would show me what would come back from those studios. And again, super talented animators overseas, but they just, if you're not incredibly precise, he showed me this one shot. I can't remember what show it was on. And it was driving through the desert. And they had clearly said the note was, we need some foliage in this desert. and they had filled it with Christmas trees. So it was like it was just like that kind of stuff. But like, you know, for every single shot, it was something where you had to be like, okay, we need to redo this, or you're missing this specific thing. So we never went that route. Although there were a couple of places that, you know, there was a place in Spain that got in touch with us, and then, as Morgan said, when we gave them a test to see if they could mimic the style, it wasn't what we were doing, you know.
Just out of curiosity, because I'm always fascinated by how much things cost, because maybe I have an idea to do like a 5-second animated sequence, and I don't know if I can do it for $1,000 or $100,000, you know. So do you usually pay an animator by the day, like a day rate, or by number of frames or number of seconds?
So we did it both ways. When we started, we did it by number of frames, but then once we got our core people done, we paid them, I think it was technically by hour, but they were all working a specific number of hours a week and then a year eventually. So they all had what amounted to like a set salary. We weren't ever pushing them to go into like overtime or anything. We tried to keep it civilized over the grinding 7 years that it took, you know.
7 years?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I missed that part.
But also paying per frame like incentivizes faster and sloppier, like because I mean you don't spend the time to correct things or to polish things, like, so I think we just got better animation when we switched away from that model.
Interesting. I would just think, especially if people are working from home, though I don't know, maybe they didn't work from home 3 years ago, but that you just don't know how much they're working
no, it's true.
With the day rate. But yeah.
That's absolutely true. They were working from home, but I mean, you get a sense, because it's such a small team, right? Very, very quickly, you get a sense of how much they're doing and how,
what they're
who's
producing.
going to be fast and who's going to be slow and meticulous, you know?
And then, sorry, one last money question, and then we can get back to creative stuff. But I'm curious, Morgan, this whole time you're working on this movie for 7 years, you're doing 1 second a day. Your beard is like, I hope you took a photo of your face every day.
Oh, I mean, my passport has this gigantic beard.
What do you need a passport for, man?
Yeah.
How else are you
for 7 years?
Well,
how else are you paying the rent and stuff? I know, Phil, you're doing a lot of screenwriting and stuff and other things. What are you doing, Morgan, during that time?
I mean, I was paid a small, as good of a salary as I've ever made. But
you were allowed to go out of the warehouse once a week.
So it was enough to like feel like I was contributing. But I mean, for sure, my wife paid for, she bought a house in that time, paid a mortgage. Like she's a grown up who does grown up jobs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
she's an animation widow, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Yes. She was extraordinarily patient with this whole thing, because if you add the short films in, it's really been 10 years of this. And today is our 11-year anniversary, so it's been almost our entire marriage. So,
do you remember what she looks like?
Well, yeah, maybe for a few years there, we didn't see each other quite as much as we like, but the pandemic has been a lot of time in the apartment. She was a saint, so that's mostly how I made it work.
Out. Okay, cool. So let's go back to, you need some casting to get the rest of financing to make this thing actually come out and make it all worth it.
Yeah. So I imagine you put together a laundry list of nerd adjacent performers, right? Like people that make sense, whether they're from genre or like, that they are famously a nerd, like Patton Oswalt's an easy, it's like, oh yeah, that guy would love to be in this, right? The people who quote unquote get it. How do you pitch them, and how does it work when you're like, okay, well, the physical performance is done already, Lucy Lawless. So we're just having you step in as a voice actor, but like do they have to match that? Yeah. What freedom do they have? How does that work exactly? Walk us through that part of the process.
Sure. So as far as like approaching them about it, you're exactly correct. I think I've actually used that exact same term, nerd adjacent actors, for who we approached. So and at that stage, like when bringing another producer on, we could send them finished animation and say, this is what it's going to look like, and this is the part you're going to play. And then
you're calling like their agent or something, right? You just look them up on IMDb Pro.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah,
Okay.
all going through their agents. And then I wrote them, and it wasn't like, as you would imagine, they weren't reading for it. These were offers, right? It was like I wrote a letter and was like, hey, love your work. This is the movie we made. This is our vision for it. Please come join our tiny team of weirdos and be a part of this movie.
And how many days are you asking for?
For not very many, because it's unlike filming live action. It goes incredibly quickly, this kind of stuff. So
and with a lot of flexibility, I imagine, as well.
A lot of flexibility. Yep. So to be very specific, I think we asked for patent for, we said 4 hours, but we didn't use. And I think we asked for Lucy for 8, and I think Richard E. Grant for 8, but we didn't even get close to using all that time.
Because you just have them read this, like, each line a couple times?
Yeah. So unlike in a live action shoot, like, there's no camera reset, there's no lighting, there's no. It really is. You're just sitting down and you're doing the lines and you're focusing on the performance. To get to the second part of your question, the only tricky part about this particular project is, of course, the lip sync, right? Because the lips are largely done.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So what you're asking them to do basically is, like,
match timing.
It's almost like loop group, right?
Or like ADR.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. And so there's a little bit of weirdness with that, right? Because you want to be able to tell your actors that they have freedom to make the character their own, but you have to put the asterisk there that's like, yeah, we can change the animation a little bit, but if you can match this timing as much as possible while still getting the emotion that needs to get across, please do it. And I have to say, I could never, ever be an actor. And the amount of skill that they all brought to that very strange request is really astounding. I was very afraid. Joe was the first one that we did, and we did that in person. So I went to a studio and sat in the room with him when he was doing it. And I was just like crossing my fingers and being like, I hope he gets it, and I hope he can do it. And he totally.
Well, he's a TV actor. He probably does it on half his jobs.
Yeah, it's amazing. So some of the time that it is for this movie in particular, redoing it for timing. So it's like you say, it's exactly like Loop Group. Like, they do it a couple times to get the timing right. Then once they have the timing right, we would do it a number of times for performance. And we had enough time that all of them, it was like we'd do the whole thing once, and then we had enough time to go back and redo. It was like, now that you've done the character from beginning to end, let's go back and do those first scenes again, because you've had you've taken the journey already. So let's go back and redo it.
And you never have the actors with each other. They're all recorded on their own.
They're all recorded separately.
And you're reading opposite them. One of you guys?
No, they don't. Nobody's reading opposite them. They're listening to the other performance.
Right.
In their thing. So there's nobody's reading against them. But it was great. I am very happy that I got to bring Lucy Lawless and Richard E. Grant into the same scene together. It's such an unexpected like duo of actors. It's super exciting, and two of my absolute favorites. So, and it was fun. Lucy was like, she was like, she really wanted Richard to record first because she wanted to be able to sure that she could match his performance. So it was great, so much fun. But yeah, so that's the gist of how that worked on a technical level. A couple of times we had to redo a little bit of animation. I had to go back to Patton and ask him to do some lines again, because there's an enormous amount of malleability in editing dialogue as long as people are like leaving a space between their words. So he'd run a couple of words together too much, so we couldn't chop it up to fit the animation. So I went back and was like, here's the line, just give me a pause between each word. And then he did it, and we just cut it into the performance. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears for a second to just talk about kind of the content of the movie. Obviously, we mentioned already it's very violent and has a lot of kind of crazy set pieces. How do you do the live action part of that? Are people just pretending to hold swords and things and stabbing each other and knocking each other over?
Okay, so your eye pops out in this shot, and then you catch the arrow.
Yes. We had prop weapons I
was going to say, I can show you a prop weapon. I know.
Oh right. Oh yeah.
Who are listening can't see it, but I'll pull it out.
We'll pull a screen grab though. That's great.
Okay.
All
right. Give me 1 second.
All right. Yeah. So we had a whole range of stuff. We had a bunch of dowels, and we'd fit them to be this one's got and we'd have a cardboard axe head, or here's Phil.
Okay, so this is the Guardian sword. This one is made out of wood.
Whoa, that is quite large.
Yeah, it's enormous. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, you guys.
Cool.
My brother made that for us. So yeah, we'd have them swing with those, and everyone. But it's a room full of people in their underwear with ridiculous costuming affixed to it.
Because we're not. Everybody's. There's a lot of nudity, is what I'm saying. How exposed are people?
One person shot nude. Everyone else wore their underwear.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah, there's one.
One male or female?
Female. Zod herself was wearing like a body stocking, and then I have a friend in Providence, and she notoriously is just always naked. So I was like, "Hey, do you want to come be in this movie?" And she was like, "Yeah, great." And then she was just naked for us. But everybody else was either in body stockings or in their underwear, or largely covered.
Swinging giant wooden swords in a warehouse. This actually begs a really important question, because that could either be the time of your life or a total nightmare, and maybe kind of both on the same day. Did you either of you have that moment of like, what are we doing, or like, oh my god, this is going to be so awesome?
We definitely didn't. I was hoping no passersby would come in and to see what, like, if you just walked into that
delivery. I got a bunch of vape pens.
Yeah, right. But as far as I could tell, I was having a great time. Everyone seemed to be having a great time.
Yeah, it wasn't cold or anything, I guess.
No, not too bad. Yeah, we just wanted everyone to be comfortable. Like we wouldn't ask anything that anyone didn't want to do. I have plenty of scenes in the film. Someone had a shirt on, and I needed to change it, so they didn't. So, you're not that bound to what they're doing, but so anyone who was comfortable in running around in their underwear.
We both took our shirts off for the moments that were in the film, which is not something I ever thought I would do. But I was like, you can't ask other people to do it if you're not willing to do it yourself. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that the other day. Like, is it a director's job to be willing to do whatever they ask their actors to do? Unless you're hiring like a very specific, like a fire breather or whatever,
Yeah, I used to think yes, and then I started working with stunt people, and I was oh, well, this is different, But it does beg the question, if you're asking a traditional actor who doesn't have any sort of stunt choreography or anything, and they are getting padded up and they're going to have to take a fall or whatever, like, would I do that? I don't know. That's a tricky thing.
I definitely took a fall on those mats, and they are not not I thought this was going to be cushy, like a bouncy castle,
like jumping into a West End hotel bed.
Yeah, I think for us, given the sort of that we were really just asking people to come to a warehouse outside of Providence and do this, that on a bigger film set, probably directors don't need to do anything they ask their actors to. But in this case, just to prove to people that like we were willing to do these things ourselves, and just again, to Morgan's point, make everybody feel comfortable. It felt relatively necessary to me. And I'm not somebody who takes my shirt off at the drop of a hat, but I definitely did that. So, yeah.
Overall, I'd say the mood was very playful generally. We had a lot of, games out for people over by the craft table, and people like running around and pretending to hit each other with swords and committing acts of fake violence.
I have another creative question, actually, because we've talked a lot about like the main characters are all rotoscoped, right? Their performance. But I think there's a very clear stylistic choice of like making them feel almost as if they're, cell animated in kind of like in the foreground, more or less. And your backgrounds are very painterly. They feel sort of watercolory. Again, an intentional throwback, I'm sure. But talk to me about the process of painting those, or how were those done specifically? And like, was that a different workflow in some way? And were you doing both of them, Morgan?
I am a dreadful digital painter. It's just not as, I did the backgrounds for the short films, and like they're okay, but they're also not in a painterly style. We very, very specifically wanted to match that the Bakshi and Frank Frazetta Fire and Ice look, where he has fully painted backgrounds, cell shaded looking rotoscope characters. So that was sort of the template we were working from. And then adding what he couldn't do, which is we have like foreground lighting layers that only affect the guys. So like, they're lit by fire, or they're lit by, blue lights or whatever. And there's like a room color, so they always sort of match the space a little bit, which is what we did instead of shadowing, because that would, I think, pull it away from the Bakshi look, but also adds a whole nother pass on every shot. Wait, what was the second part of that?
Backgrounds. Who did the backgrounds?
Right. I did not do any of them. We mostly looked online and would look for people who were doing this sort of fantasy art that I like, which there's a lot of people working like concept art and deviant art back when that was more of a thing. So we would reach out to them, and
Were you just like randomly like on DeviantArt or on Twitter or wherever, like Instagram, like finding artists you like and just cold emailing them?
Yes,
exactly.
And when they were like, yeah, that sounds fun, I'd be like, okay. And then we tried to get it so each artist was working on each section, which is what we did with the music too, to try to give each sort of chapter of the film its own background look and sound look. And I would do sketches of what each angle was. Like it was extremely difficult to figure out because you didn't want to pay for more paintings than you needed. So you're like, so I'd have them paint it at double the screen resolution so that I could use it, each quadrant and could zoom in.
What is the screen resolution? 1920 by 1080?
We did it at 248 by 1080. And then on the actual one that's coming out, we used one of those new 4K upscaler things and added film grain, which I think looks really good on my 4K TV. So then I would give them sketches and try to maximize the usage as much as humanly possible, and then send them those, and they would send back proofs. They're like, do you want it lit like this or like that? And we'd just sort of winnow it down. I mean, I think we ultimately had, which was it, like 6 or 7 painters,
Yep.
Phil?
It's no Americans, weirdly. Those were all, I mean, it was relatively international.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah. And like disproportionately German. I don't know what it is about German art schools that produce great background painters, but the best, I mean, they were all fantastic, but 2 of our most reliable and best guys were German.
There's a huge overlap between like metal and fantasy, and like obviously heavy metal is like a big deal in Germany, so it doesn't surprise me that got a lot of German dudes.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I know we talked a lot about the craft and like the technical stuff and the business of it all, but I think you should check out the movie if you're listening to this, because it's a wild ride. My nanny was here when I was watching it. I had to keep closing the door and turning the volume down because she thought people were being murdered in my office.
I think that's the way it should be experienced. The more you can feel like a 17-year-old kid,
yes, like you're gonna get in trouble for watching it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's totally the vibe we're going for. Yeah.
So I guess my last question before we go into the unpaid endorsements real quick is what's next? What's the hope? I know the movie's not out yet, but do you want to move into like the big animated studio films? Like, you want to kind of keep directing? What is this a stepping stone to something else, or you just want to kind of keep doing this over and over?
I'd like to keep doing this. Like, I mean, to me, what's really exciting, well, a lot of things are exciting about this, but being an independently made feature film that is animated, I mean, there's so few. We were lucky to be out the same year as Dash Shaw's Crypto Zoo, but there's just hardly any, certainly made in the West. So I have always been a big champion of independent art. I don't want to go work for a corporation that's going to tell me I can't cover everything in blood and make sure and want me to put pants on people. It's just not going to happen. So
no pants policy.
Yeah. But would you be okay with spending another 7 years on the next movie?
My hope is that this will open enough doors that we can finance more animators and do more, like have more comprehensive training in this ostensibly dead art form.
But so 3 years is okay.
3 years would be great. 3 years would feel like a vacation.
3 years is how long a DreamWorks film takes to make.
I was going to say almost every project I've ever worked on has taken at least 3 years. So 3 years would be roughly average, I think.
But we've certainly, we've had a lot of time to think about the world and the characters. We have, sketches and outlines and, all sorts of stuff we could do if the demand was there. Although, it feels like it's so close to live action in a lot of ways too. I'd love to try my hand at that again at some time in my life, but I would do this again if I had to.
And if people want to follow you guys personally, like, are you on Instagram or social media anywhere we can kind of check out, like kind of keep track of what you guys are doing?
All my stuff is, just like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook / The Spine of Night. And we've got the gorgonaut.net website, which has all the old short films are on there, and the mailing list if you want to sign up for a bunch of cool shirts. And Phil's around.
Oh yeah, and I'm mostly on Twitter. My personal Twitter is at PMJeepers, JEEPERS. But I'm on Instagram too, but to be honest, I barely use either of them. But occasionally, currently, I'm on Twitter a lot because I'm trying to get people to see this movie. So
Yeah, there's always those people. They're like
yeah.
never on social media, and then they have something coming out. All of a sudden, they're
I've got a lot of opinions all of a
Instagram.
sudden.
Hashtag self-promotion. Don't
Yeah.
worry, guys. Yeah. Awesome, guys.
Well, cool. Do you guys have a couple minutes left to do endorsements with us?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unpaid endorsements.
So my unpaid endorsement is inspired by this conversation. We've been talking a lot about Ralph Bakshi over the past 45 minutes. And off mic, I mentioned my favorite is Wizards, which it's been a minute since I've revisited it, but I think is worth the time. What I remember seeing it as a teenager, like I hope some teenagers are listening and can check out Spine of Night to have that kind of psychedelic experience. But that one, Wizards in particular, really mixes a lot of like traditional film on top with animation on top of it. That's pretty wild and stylistically blew my mind as a kid. There's like a lot of like old war propaganda, and kind of to me is that like sweet spot of, it's about the war between magic and technology in the distant dystopian future. So it's exactly what you want out of like a 70s like stoner animation. So Wizards, I hope I didn't step on your toes, guys.
I mean, we could talk about Bakshi films at great length, but
Sure.
Okay. An unpaid endorsement. I was gonna poach Matt Smith from Telluride's before Phil could do it, but I won't in case he wants to.
No, you go ahead. Like, I've got others. You go ahead.
Oh, okay. So at Telluride, we saw a couple of short film blocks, and we watched this one called The Provider by this guy, Matt Smith. I don't know anything about him, but he's got his several other short films up on his website, Matt Reed Smith, and they are extremely low budget, extremely disturbing and weird, and they're kind of gross, but they're like long, droning shots of discomfort. Like this one, The Provider, is about like this guy goes into a house after a very long drive. He turns around, it's all in real time, misses the spot, comes back to the thing, and then it's a room that has, I can only refer to as testicles, hairy testicles hanging from the ceiling that he then has to get inside of with an implement, and it's extremely gross. And then like the unwritten world around it, where he takes, I mean, I don't want to spoil it. So people, the events of like, what is the circumstance in this world? Why are his kids here? What is going on with the thing? It's just tremendously weird. And like, I mean, the most like refreshing thing I'd seen in a while. But then the twist is he shot it in 2003. So it's also old, but Phil has actually seen his newer one that I have, The Altruist, that I have not had a chance to see yet, but I'm extremely excited to.
Wow, cool. And can we see these like on Vimeo or something?
Yeah, they're on his Vimeo page, Matt REID Reed Smith.
Great, we'll check that out. Yeah, mattreedsmith.com he has a website with all his stuff on there.
Yeah, his new one is called The Altruist, and it's highly recommended. It's really, what did I call it? Like intoxicatingly unpalatable. that's your thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gross.
Yummy.
Okay. You got anything, Phil?
Yeah, heck yeah, I do. I'm gonna do. Can I do two? I've got two short ones. Okay. My first one is Metroid Dread, which is on the Switch. Probably doesn't need me to push it, but it's fantastic. If anybody likes old school Metroids, it's like very much like the
side scroller.
Side scroller, yeah. It's like Super Metroid.
Wow.
Again, once
cool.
again, they
Awesome.
they were into like first person stuff for a while, which I was not into, but this is very much a return to the Super Metroid style, and I think earns the subtitle. It's pretty. I've experienced Dread a number of times while playing it, which is exactly what I want from my Metroid game. My second one is the novels of David Peace, which is not. He's a true crime writer. He wrote the Red Riding Quartet. Not fantasy, not Rotoscope, nothing to do with what we're talking about in this conversation at all. And I am reading his book called Occupied City right now, and it's maybe one of the best things I've ever read. It's exactly my speed. It's like a set in Tokyo in 1948 based on a real case where a guy walked into a bank wearing a badge that said he was working for like the medical society that was trying to get rid of dysentery in the city, and had everybody in the bank drink poison and then robbed the bank. And it goes in so many interesting directions.
Wait, did they die?
Yes.
Oh my God.
I mean, it wasn't like the bank was full of people. There was, I think, 10 or 11 people died and 13 were poisoned. But it is written in a really, David Peace's style is just overheated, wrought poeticism, like James Ellroy, but taken farther. And the book is structured sort of based a bit on Rashomon, but Rashomon had like 12 different perspectives. And it's
that's not how I remember it.
Yeah, exactly. It goes in all kinds of amazing directions. Anyway, I love it.
What's it called again?
It's called Occupied City.
Occupied City. Oh, wow.
Yep.
Good ones, guys. Okay, so I also have two short ones. Number one, both kind of related to this conversation, maybe not. First one is, I know everyone knows about Photoshop, and there's like the magic wand selection brush, and there's this, you select it with a W on your keyboard. There's also the circle selector that you can kind of draw an outline. But I don't know if everyone knows about this other part of the selection brush, which is even if you like use Photoshop like once a year, like hopefully you know about this would be useful. If you're on any of those selection tools, the W selection tools, there's like a little checkbox or like a button at the top of your screen that says select subject. And you literally can put a picture of anything into Photoshop and you hit select subject, and like 9 times out of 10, it will perfectly select like a person out of a background. It'll do anything. And if you want to just do a real quick, especially if you don't know much about Photoshop and you just want to like cut a person out of a photo, you just use that tool, the selection tool, and hit select subject. It'll grab them. You can just like hit Apple C and paste them into your Pages document or whatever.
Oren, I was doing just that the other day, the old school way, and saw the select subject button and was like, I should try that sometime. So
yeah,
thanks,
it's so not like, it's not very in your face, and I feel like they don't really push it, but it's like an awesome feature.
Does it do a content aware fill behind it? Like that?
Oh no, it's basically, it just draws a selection.
Well, because if you could cut it and then use the content aware fill is amazing. We use that for backgrounds throughout the Spinal
I bet you guys did.
Shift F5.
Yeah.
Content aware fill. Love that too. I always recommend, if you're doing select subject and then content aware fill to like get a blank background, I recommend going to the select menu and expanding your selection by like 5 pixels before you do that to make sure there's no weird edges.
We found the exact center of your Venn diagram, guys.
Well, the other thing, it's kind of on the edge of both of our Venn diagrams. But I saw this tweet from this guy named Nick Dale. I don't know. I'm sure a lot of people have talked about this movie, but there's this Cuban movie called Soy Cuba. Have you guys heard of this movie? It's super old. It's from 1964. It was, I think, made by like communist Russian people in Cuba. And it's just filled with all these impossible shots, like shots where you watch them. And this is a 1964 pre-Steadicam invention. And you're like, how the heck did they do this? It's like a woman walking on the street, then the camera cranes up, goes across between two BTS buildings.
Footage of like stuff where it's like, oh, that camera's in a bucket.
I could not find any BTS footage. People said that the camera operator was wearing like a harness with a bunch of hooks on it. And literally people are connecting him to pulleys and things. And he's like flying up in the air. But he like walks out of this window that has nothing outside. And he's like, 50 feet up in the air. And then just like it turns into like a drone shot. But it's 1964 and there's like 1,000 people in the shot too. I mean, it's just totally nuts. And they made the whole movie for like, $300,000 or something insane. But anyway, if you just look up like Soy Cuba, impossible crane shot, anything about Soy Cuba cinematography, you'll find it. It's kind of all over the internet recently, but if you somehow missed it, check it out. It's worth marveling at. Well, thanks so much, guys. For coming on the podcast.
One more time, where can people check out the movie? What's the best way for them to keep track of whether or not it's in their town and how they can watch it when it is available to them?
I mean, on all social media, look for The Spine of Night, but the mailing list at gorgonaut.net, we're going to just load up with every bit of salient information you could ever want.
Cool. If you have any thoughts about this, if you want us to forward any messages to Phil and Morgan or anything, ask us questions, tell us your comments, tell us what you thought of Spine of Night, you can email us at justshootitpod@gmail.com. You can find us across all social media at Just Shoot It Pod. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at SmiteyPyleg, and I'm at OKaplan on Instagram.
You can follow me at Mr. Madamo. This episode was edited by Sarah Weirda. Thanks, Sarah. And you're listening to music provided by the Free Music Archive and the artist Jazar. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys.